Welcome, travelers. We're aware that your journey was difficult, but prepare to have your questions answered, for you have been granted an audience with the Masters of Modern.
Music, and welcome back to Masters of Modern. I'm your host today, Michael Grothy, and I'm here with our guest, Reuben Bresler.
Hi. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Alex is out of town for basically the whole month of October, so I'm going to be hosting with various guests, including Reuben. Ben is also out of commission for now.
Right.
So we are going to get started. We're going to talk about how Eldraine is affecting Modern, because we talked about it last week, but there is even more cool stuff. And also we can hear, Reuben's take on Modern.
Yeah. Modern's is in a actually really good spot right now. Getting rid of Faithless Looting, I think everybody knew was going to shake it up, but they didn't know if the shakeup was going to end up leading to another unhealthy kind of format with Mox Opal and Ancient Stirrings being the top dogs.
Yeah, those were like the three cards everybody always talked about banning. And then, one of them finally got banned.
Right, exactly. And there was a minute there where we thought that Faithless Looting was going to be the next Brainstorm. There was going to be just a tacit understanding. We know it's broken, but we're going to leave it.
Yeah.
But it turns out that getting rid of Faithless Looting led to a really nice proliferation of a wide variety of decks in Modern.
Yeah, totally. And then, Faithless Looting getting banned, Stoneforge getting unbanned, Modern Horizons getting introduced to the format, War of the Spark getting introduced to the format, now Eldraine getting introduced to the format. There's been a ton of power level added to the format, as well as Faithless Looting being removed, and it really just shook things up.
I was a little concerned with Stoneforge. My whole thing with Stoneforge is that you're not really opening a ton of play space with Stoneforge. You're just introducing a 6-card package into a couple of other decks.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the big argument against Stoneforge that I was seeing was it kind of homogenizes mid-range decks.
Yeah.
Because if you're a mid-range deck that isn't playing Stoneforge, then are you just worse than the ones that are playing mid-range decks? So then you end up with Bant mid-range and Abzan mid-range and Mardu mid-range and decks that can play Stoneforge, right? But I feel like we're not actually seeing that.
It's actually not a problem. The issue it would have been a problem if we were seeing Jund splashing Stoneforge.
Yeah,
we haven't.
I think that would be the good indicator.
We haven't really seen that. There are no old school Ajundi decks, right? We're not accidentally splashing Stoneforge into our Tarmogoyf Abrupt Decay Lightning Bolt decks.
Yeah, it seems like the decks that are playing Stoneforge nowadays are just generally built around Stoneforge,
right?
And, what you would expect,
which is healthy.
Just kind of
which is healthy and good.
So that was a good on them, good unban. But yeah, before we get too far into it, let me do my announcements. I have a cheat sheet so I don't miss anything.
Fabulous.
Since I'm not as experienced of a host as Alex or Ben. So we've got, I'm going to shout out the Masters of Modern Twitter. We're at the MMcast on Twitter. Alex is at Kess Wiley. Ben is at Ben Bateman Media. I am at Dudard, Dudardd. And if you want to follow Reuben,
I'm on everywhere at MOXREUBY, Mox Ruby.
Awesome. We also have a YouTube. If you are listening to this in podcast form and you don't know that we have a YouTube or you've never been there, check it out. Like the video, subscribe, comment. All that engagement helps out a lot on YouTube. And you also get to, see our beautiful faces.
Yeah. YouTube is mostly how I consume this podcast.
Awesome. So. Yeah. I mean, that's good to hear. I'm glad that people are watching over there. I know that the podcast has been successful for so long, and video is pretty new to us. So it's good to know that people are enjoying it. We also have a Facebook group on Facebook. It's a great place to talk about Modern. There's it's a huge group to the point where a lot of the members don't even know there is a podcast.
Right.
Every time we mention it on there, people are like, wait, what podcast?
Right.
But it's because there's so many people, it's a great place to talk about Modern. You get a lot of different opinions in there. Deck discussion, ban list discussion, all that type of stuff. It's just the Masters of Modern official Facebook group.
Right.
We also recently started up a Masters of Standard group because people kept posting about Standard in there, and we were like, we'll just make a group for you.
Good.
It's not a podcast. It's just kind of related to the group more than it's related to the podcast. But if, you've been playing Standard on Arena the way I have.
Sure, same.
Where I was never really a Standard player. I played it in a couple of GPs because they were local. But now that Arena, I've been playing Standard a lot, and so that group is a good place to kind of post your list and be like, hey, what do you guys think? I'm a Modern player. I don't know much about Standard. Help me out.
Yeah, exactly. I'm playing daily to just do my quests, but I'd also like to win.
Yeah.
So,
Winning's good.
Right. If I'm playing my 25 lands and killing my 40 creatures, I'd like to go up a rank, and so that's a good spot to be in.
Totally. We've also got a Patreon. It always helps to support us on Patreon. You get access to uncut episodes where we kind of have little side conversations before the show while we're getting all the audio set up and things. Yeah, so that's a good reward that we've got going. Also, it's great to support the show, and as our community grows, we're able to also grow the Patreon benefits. There's also access to some Patreon exclusive channels on Discord where we sometimes post cool deck lists that we've found, kind of discuss with people in there. Which we also have a Discord channel. I believe Marshall's been posting it on the link to it on our YouTube. It's open to everybody, but you get access to a couple of Patreon exclusive channels if you're a Patreon subscriber. And also also check out our sister podcast, The Command Zone. They talk everything Commander. It's a great show. It's the biggest Commander show around, and they do great stuff. So if you were also interested in Commander, check them out for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, now that that's all out of the way, let's get to some Modern. So, yeah, I mean, Marshall and I talked a little bit last week about kind of what we were hoping to see come out of Eldraine and make a splash in Modern, as well as a little bit of what we were seeing. What is your initial take, or what was your initial take on Eldraine in Modern?
My initial thought with Eldraine going into Modern was typically the same with every set. I look for... for the first thing I look for in Modern is free spells. And so Once Upon a Time was the first thing that went on my radar for Modern and Legacy and Vintage. I mean, anytime something says cast this for free, it's a problem. Yeah. Or potentially a problem.
Right.
We've seen a little bit of that, but it hasn't been nearly as ubiquitous as I thought it was going to end up being.
So do you think that people are sleeping on the card, or maybe we just haven't found the right shell that really breaks it? Or
I think it's a tough card to find the right shell for.
Yeah.
I think that it does a interesting Ancient Stirrings impression. It does not do an Ancient Stirrings impression.
Right.
And keep in mind, it took Ancient Stirrings years before it became the powerhouse that it is.
That's true.
And so you need to find, because of the what the card does, what the card finds, lands and creatures, you need to find. It really is best not in a value shell, but in a combo shell. And so you want
I agree with that.
Land combo and creature combo to be able to utilize it. So the first thing I thought of was Hexmage Depths for Legacy. But then talking about Modern, decks like Amulet Titan, decks like Goryo's Vengeance, other Thespian Stage style strategies. Also, those are the kinds of decks that I was probably thinking more of with Once Upon a Time.
Yeah, and Amulet Titan is similar to a lot of those decks where it's like a combo of, a land and a creature doing some busted stuff. They need an artifact to help them out a lot of the time. But yeah, I mean, it's that deck we have seen is generally just playing 3 or 4 Once Upon a Time now, and as well as the Neo brand decks that everybody predicted. It'll help you find your low land count lands if you need a second land, or it'll help you find your Allosaurus Rider.
Right, exactly. Being able to swap out the Faithless Looting pretty much directly for the Once Upon a Times kind of helped with that. You're able to put the cards into the graveyard in a different way, but still digging deeper into your library in those kinds of decks to be able to get your Allosaurus Rider, get your Ilharg, get your whatever creature it is that you need at the time. The other thing that I always now we live in this world where 3-mana planeswalkers are ridiculous. So every 3-mana planeswalker that comes out is a threat.
Yeah.
Honestly, I thought the Royal Scions was going to be the card of the two.
I still think the Royal Scions have legs.
For sure.
I actually have a Grixis Death Shadow list with a couple of Royal Scions in here that we'll talk about when we start talking about specific lists. But yeah, we have 2 3-mana planeswalkers in the set, which is certainly something to look at.
Right.
And you know what I just realized? I'm going to interrupt this conversation for 1 second. I didn't tell all the viewers who you are.
Oh, hi. Yes.
Who are you?
Hi, everybody. I'm the internet's Reuben Bresler, the Mox Ruby. I am one of the co-hosts of the Magic Mics podcast.
Great podcast.
MAGICMICS, every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 p.m. Eastern. That's 5 p.m. Hawaiian, for those of you playing along at home. We talk about the week that was in Magic the Gathering, pretty much a news roundup McLaughlin group kind of show with myself, Aaron Campbell, and Evan Irwin. I am also the Dungeon Master for The Broken Pact on the Dungeons & Dragons official Twitch and YouTube channel and podcast. We are presently in season 3. You can catch that live on twitch.tv/DND at 8 p.m. on Monday nights.
And that's a
Dungeons & Dragons live play show.
right, and it's based on the Ravnica book originally.
Yes. So we were the official Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica show.
Right.
And for 2 seasons, my players grew up and lived and worked and did adventures there, and then they accidentally got shunted into another plane.
Which that's how it works in Magic, right? Sometimes you get shunted to another plane.
That's
but
right.
yeah, so if you guys know that there was this D&D Magic crossover and never really checked it out and wanted to see what's going on with all that, The Broken Pact is a great place to kind of get a feel for what D&D on Ravnica looks like. At least the first 2 seasons are.
Yeah.
I know when it came out, I was pretty excited to see all this, and I watched the first season of Broken Pact. I fell a little bit behind due to there being an infinite amount of content to consume on the internet. But when Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica first came out, I was pretty excited about it, and I knew that I didn't have time myself for a campaign, so I watched yours.
So season 3, we're actually slightly shorter episodes because we decided that 2 hours is like a better time frame to do it in. I still use a bunch of the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica stuff. All of my players are still Ravnica backgrounds.
Yeah.
They're still...
Yeah, there's a Loxodon in the party, which is like a pretty magic-specific creature that you got to make sure...
And this season in Avernus, which is the first level of Hell, they're really bringing Ravnica with them, and I wanted to showcase how you can bring your background as a Ravnica person, or really anything, into another place. And
that's awesome.
There's a lot of that. I use magic cards as my items that I hand out to my players when they find stuff. Clever. So yeah.
That's
a lot
great.
of crossover.
That's great. Okay, so now that we've gotten into that, I realized I had forgotten that as a relatively novice podcast host myself. Let's get back into Eldraine stuff. We were talking about 3-mana planeswalkers.
Oko obviously was always going to be the standard standout because it is a 3-mana planeswalker that jumps up to 6 and immediately
so does the Royal Scions.
Value. Does Royal Scions also
Royal
jump up to 6?
Scions also jumps up to 6. Let me double check here. I got a list pulled up with Royal Scions, and I can just hover over.
Oh, wow, it does.
Yeah, they start at 5 and plus 1.
Jeez.
Yeah, the old 3-mana planeswalker that goes up to 6.
And with 2 +1s. That's crazy.
Yeah. And Oko's got a +2 and a +1.
So the thing about the Royal Scions is it doesn't really protect itself.
Yeah, it doesn't affect the board.
Right. Whereas Oko doesn't also, but can.
Right. After 2 turns, you can generate a blocker from nothing.
Right.
And you can also, immediately, depending on if you already have blockers or whatever, you can neutralize in one of your opponent's threats. You can turn your Birds of Paradise into a 3/3 or your Arkham's Astrolabe or something.
But both do eventually. I mean, the Royal Scions does a pretty decent Dak Faden impression, which was a standout in Vintage. So
it gets played in Legacy every once in a while.
Right.
I mean, it's a little bit out of favor right now just because of where the metagame is at, but you see Dak in 4-color Planeswalker lists,
right?
From time to time.
The fact of the matter is that both of these, every time a 3-mana Planeswalker is printed, regardless of whether it's 3-mana Teferi or Nissa or Liliana the Last Hope. I mean, it's worth looking at in Modern, and that's already borne out a little bit. There's more room for the Royal Scions to grow, I feel, whereas Oko has popped up in some random places, just all over the place.
There's less to say about the Royal Scions, so I want to talk about them first. I think the trick with the Royal Scions is that, obviously +1 draw a card and then discard a card is going to be powerful in a lot of different shells. It's a 3-mana effect, so it's not necessarily something you're playing in, Dredge or whatever, because it's a little bit too expensive for, fast graveyard combo. But it gives you a little bit of steady graveyard value, and it's card selection, which is always powerful. I think the trick to the Royal Scions is figuring out how to use the other +1. The target creature gets +2/+0 and gains first strike and trample until end of turn. And I think that this list that 5-0'd on Magic Online that I have brought up here is a Grixis Death Shadow deck where you're playing Death Shadow that obviously gets 7/7, 8/8, 9/9 12/12, whatever.
Right.
Giving it +2/+0 and trample is just going to outright kill your opponent sometimes. And then you're also playing 4 Gurmag Angler, which is a 5/5. And so giving those creatures trample is going to do a lot against a lot of decks where they can kind of use your low life total to like block and try and race you. Well, my creature has trample.
Yeah.
Good luck racing me. As well as like the little bit of graveyard value can be welcome in some Death Shadow decks because you have Gurmag Angler. This deck is also playing 2 Jace Vryn's Prodigy and 3 Snapcaster Mage, which I think Jace and the Royal Scions are also great friends, although he doesn't use the +1 as well. But the looting, having like all that looting makes for a lot of cards in your graveyard if you care about that.
Yeah.
The other place I've seen the Royal Scions, and I don't know if any of these decks have had a lot of success. I haven't found one, but if anybody does find one, please tweet it at me because I'm super interested in seeing Royal Scions decks in action, is with Dreadhorde Arcanist.
Oh, okay, sure.
Because Dreadhorde Arcanist is the 1/3 trample. When it attacks, you cast an instant or sorcery from your graveyard with converted mana cost equal to or less than its power. And it's a 1/3. So generally you're flashing back maybe an Inquisition of Kozilek or a Lightning Bolt or an Opt or something like that. But with the Royal Scions, you can now flash back 3 drops. So if in a Grixis Shell with that, you want to play a lot of 1-drops in case you don't have the Royal Scions out to make sure your Dreadhorde Arcanist does something. Mm-hmm. You can also flash back like a Kolaghan's Command.
Right.
Or like,
I think Kolaghan's Command is the real selling point on that one.
Yeah.
I like that. And it also feeds your Dreadhorde Arcanist. So if you go turn 1, comes into play tapped land, turn 2 Arcanist, turn 3 Scions, loot, cast a 1 for free anyway. Yeah, that's really strong.
Yeah, and then, maybe they kill your Arcanist, you get it back with Kolaghan's Command, you replay the Arcanist, you swing in for 3 and get back the Kolaghan's Command and do
go to town.
Million different things because that's what Kolaghan's Command does. So I really like that combo. I don't know if it's seen a lot of success on Magic Online yet. I've been keeping my eye out, but I haven't noticed. But I'm pulling for it. So yeah, and then that's the main places we're seeing the Royal Scions. I think the key is using the other +1. As far as Oko goes, over the weekend we saw a little bit of Oko in Wurza, which was a somewhat surprising place to see it for me. There's some people playing it sideboard, and then some people playing 1 or 2 in the main deck. But what's interesting about that is like Oko comes down and makes an artifact. And that's not something we've seen people using. It's more like Oko is life gain. Oko can get rid of, opponents' threats by making them into 3/3s.
Right.
Kind of catch-all answer to stuff. As opposed to like a card that's making Mox Sapphires every turn.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was a surprising use of Oko, but now that you see it, it's, 3 mana +2, go up to 6, make another permanent on the board. I mean, it took a while before people figured out clues in terms of value. Obviously, the drawing a card off of a clue was super obvious, but using the clues for affinity or using the clues for getting to the City's Blessing or different ways to use the clues. Food is a lot less intuitive in that way.
Yeah. Because it's draw cards. When you see draw cards, you're like, this is obviously good. When you see gain life, you're like, maybe against burn or something.
Right. Food, adorable, right? But not modern playable alongside Urza.
Yeah.
But turns out feeding Urza every turn is a pretty spectacular combo.
Yeah, and also with Goblin Engineer, it gives you a little bit of resilience to like a Shatterstorm or something like that, where like all your artifacts are gone, your Goblin Engineer now does nothing. But if you have an Oko on the board, Shatterstorm doesn't kill Oko. Oko can make a food, and then you can immediately
that's good.
Sacrifice to Goblin Engineer to get something back, and start your engine back up, which I also think is interesting. I've also seen, speaking of clues, in some of these Urza decks that are splashing green for Oko, I have seen Tireless Tracker. This one that 5-0'd that I pulled up actually doesn't have Tireless Tracker in the sideboard, but it's just kind of like a late game value engine that also kind of produces these artifacts that sit around and will, tap for mana or sacrifice to a Goblin Engineer. I mean,
even if it's menial value, it's value. There's still, one is not 0. Food is better than literally nothing.
Yeah, and turning your opponent's Pithing Needle into an Elk is also something that you're interested in this deck. So.
Exactly. Yeah. I love it.
So that's like an unusual home for Oko, but there's also just decks that are like Oko mid-range decks.
Yeah.
He's just like a good enough card to kind of make people interested in playing mid-range decks that contain Oko.
Yeah, the thing about the blue-green kind of mid-rangey kind of decks that exist already is that the creatures that those decks are playing typically are playing creatures that have value when they enter the battlefield, and then that's about it. Coiling Oracles and Icefang Codals and Elvish Visionary kind of cards.
And really, we didn't see a lot of blue-green mid-range in Modern ever until Icefang Codal. Icefang Codal was kind of what made people want to start building around blue-green.
Yeah.
And then we've seen like Bant Soul Herder, and we've seen like some Sultai mid-range with Icefang, kind of a Jundish shell, but with blue cards, counter spells, instead of lightning bolts. But.
Yeah. What's really nice about Oko, when you're making your Icefanged Codal a 3/3, it's losing flying, but it's staying a snow creature. So you're maintaining your value of the subtype without having to sacrifice too much. You're still losing flying, I suppose, but your Icefang Codal is still a snow permanent. As a 3/3 elk, which is pretty cool.
Snow is a super type, right?
Yeah.
So it says Oko's second ability overwrites all colors and creature types. I'm reading the Gatherer rulings because I wasn't sure about this. It's just a green elk. The creature keeps any super types like snow, but loses any other card types such as artifact. So it does lose artifact, but it will keep snow, which is relevant.
Yeah. Okay.
It'll also keep legendary, which is interesting because if you if your opponent allows you to untap and they have an Urza in play, or maybe they have a Sai, right? You can make their Sai into an elk, and they can't play another one because it has the same card name, right? And then...
Well, they could.
Well, yeah, I guess they sacrifice their elk, though, right? So they're
still losing value.
It's destroy target creature, right?
Right. At that point, it's a 3-mana planeswalker that's destroy target creature.
Yeah, because you're destroying their Sai, basically. You're turning into a 3/3. If they want to play another one, they're going to have to sack it because it's legendary.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So yeah, I mean, Oko as value is something that I think that we all saw coming. The one that I didn't see coming was Oko in like Merfolk, and
oh wow,
yeah, I saw
that one. That's cool.
That's a weird one. I don't think it's put up any results yet, but it was certainly getting chatter from the Merfolk fans.
The Merfolk fans, they're always around.
Yeah.
What was that a main deck Oko or sideboard?
I think that's a main deck Oko.
Wow.
That's just like getting in there. Just like play my turn 1 Curse Catcher or whatever, and now I just am being.
That's cool, and it gives you some late game because a lot of times Merfolk is kind of like a dump my hand and then like hope they don't have a sweeper situation,
right?
And Oko allows you to like, well, you swept my board, but I have a food lying around. I'll make it into a 3/3 and hit you.
Yeah.
But yeah, one of the cool Oko decks that we saw was like a Sultai Planeswalker deck with. This deck. Talk about this one because
this deck
weird.
looks so weird, and it just makes me mad looking at this deck because this deck is just the all-stars. It's like they didn't even need to build this deck. It was just like, what are the best 10 cards from the last 5 years?
Well, realistically, somebody was brave enough to put them all in a deck and go for it. So
somebody's got to do it. And so this is a really weird, interesting deck.
So it starts out looking like a Sultai kind of, blue, like a black-green rock base where you have 4 Liliana the Veil, 3 Inquisition, 3 Thoughtseize, 4 Fatal Push, and 4 Tarmogoyf, which is like a tried and true shell for a deck. Never going to go wrong with that. Then they're playing 4 Icefang Codal, which is at home in a deck like this, which brings 4 Archamaster Label along with it, because they are like a grindy value card that you might want in your black-green deck, right? So that's all not very surprising. The rest of the deck is 4 Utopia Sprawl to ramp, which is an unusual include, and then 3 Oko Thief of Crowns, 4 Karn the Great Creator, 1 Jace the Mind Sculptor. So instead of playing more creatures like a typical rock deck where you're playing like Tireless Trackers or something like that, they opted for just like the full Planeswalker package, and 3 Oko made the cut.
Yeah. And Karn. Like, this is now a Karn the Great Creator deck.
Right.
Which is wild.
And this is something we've talked about on the show where we think that Karn is a little bit dangerous for pretty much any format, really, since it got restricted in Vintage even. But even for Modern, because it can just be slotted into any deck. It is colorless. Every card that it's going to fetch out of your sideboard, for the most part, is colorless. And so if you are a mid-range deck or a combo deck that wants a backup plan, Karn the Great Creator is just something that you can always lean on no matter what your deck is. And like Reuben was saying with Stoneforge, that's something that can lead to kind of like a dangerously homogenized format. We haven't seen that yet with Karn, but this deck is kind of like
hinting.
Yeah, it's hinting at what Karn can do, right? Which is be a 4-drop that slots into any deck and sometimes just wins the game randomly. But yeah, so the Utopia Sprawl allows you to ramp into turn 2 Oko, turn 2 Liliana, turn 3 Karn or Jace. It's just like a ramp spell, which is a really interesting. Like, this deck is only playing 8 creatures, and 4 of them are Ice Fang Quaddle. So it's, your opponent, if they're playing removal spells, would often just have an extra removal spell for your Noble Hierarch or whatever, or your Birds of Paradise. So they opted for Utopia Sprawl instead, which is interesting because I feel like in Modern we typically only see Utopia Sprawl in like hard ramp decks playing Arbor Elf like Ponza or, Tooth and Nail decks or something like that. And this is just like a normal, rock style deck with 4 Utopia Sprawl in it just to like play their Planeswalkers as quickly as possible.
Right. And not even that many actual forests.
Yeah, we were talking about this. So they're playing 4 Field of Ruin, and then they have to play the full complement of Snowlands, which includes 3 snow-covered swamps and a snow-covered island to make sure you can cast your double black Lilianas and such. And then 2 snow-covered forests, 2 overgrown tomb. That's all the forests in the deck.
Yeah.
So you're just hoping to fetch one with one of your 8
and
fetches.
8 fetch lands, exactly.
Right,
This is such a strange looking deck, but it also, you see how it all fits together. It just looks super weird.
So, you know what I think? I'm interested to see like if these 4 Utopia Sprawls became 4 Golden Goose.
Sure.
One thing that I thought was interesting about Golden Goose that was I read in Sam Black's article that came out this week about. I read all of Sam Black's articles on Star City. I'm sure the viewers know this by now, but he was saying that like Golden Goose is like it accelerates your mana 1 time and then it generates value.
Yep.
So for decks that only need their mana accelerated 1 time, Golden Goose is good. And what's interesting about Utopia Sprawl in this deck is a lot of times you'll play Utopia Sprawl and then your opponent like Field of Ruins you on turn 3.
Sure.
But at that point you've already played an Oko, you've already played a Liliana, or you have like a Tarmogoyf and you Inquisitioned on turn 2 or whatever, right? Like you've already gotten the mana out of it and you don't really care if they blow it up at that point, which Golden Goose is in the same spot. Now it can be killed more easily, more quickly because they don't have to, have Field of Ruin on turn 3. There's plenty of ways to kill a creature for 1 or 2 mana in Modern.
I definitely think that the ceiling is higher on Golden Goose, but the floor is also lower.
Right.
Like you open yourself up to, like you don't really care if your opponent kills your Ice Fang Kotal. You don't really care that much if your opponent kills your Tarmogoyf.
Yeah.
In this deck, because this is a Karn deck. This deck is a control deck. Really.
Yeah, Karn is your win con, maybe Jace.
Yeah. So, playing Utopia Sprawl turns off your opponent's bolts, for example.
Yeah.
Turns off your opponent's paths.
Yeah, that is true. Well, path on Golden Goose is fine, right?
Yeah.
If they path your mana dork, you're chilling.
You're kind of happy, but again, they were only going to ramp once, and then they were going to get value.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that is true. That is the Utopia Sprawl is just always consistent mana on turn 2 if it's in your opener, and that's what this deck is looking for. More than a value engine. It's got value aplenty.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, that was a cool deck that I wanted to talk about. This other Oko deck that we saw is like a fairies deck. That is playing Gilded Goose. And then it's also playing a few ninjas. It's playing 4 Ingenious Infiltrator, which you can attack with Gilded Goose and Ninjutsu, which I think is part of the reason they're playing the Gilded Goose in here. And then along with their 3 Okos and like a fairy package of 4 Spell Stutter, 2 Vendilion Click, 1 Brazen Borrower, the new fairy on the block, 4 Ice Fang Kotal, which is like an honorary fairy in decks like this.
Exactly.
And 2 Bitter Blossom, as well as some discard or removal and counter spells. 1 Cryptic, 1 Drown in the Lock, 4 Fatal Push, 2 Force Negation, 1 Spell Snare.
Yeah, Drown in the Lock is an interesting one. This one doesn't put a ton of cards into your opponent's graveyards, but It's also just good value.
Yeah, it's just a one of, right?
Yeah.
Like it'd be a little bit awkward in this deck if it was in your opener, but it's like a pretty good top deck.
It's also fine against, in a fetch land format, you're going to have more value with Drown in the Locks, so that's good.
Yeah, and what's nice is that it has applications in every single matchup. Like if your opponent is an aggressive creature deck, it kills their creature. If your opponent is a combo deck, it counters their combo piece. If they're a control deck, it can protect one of your spells because it's cheap enough to like reasonably play in the same turn as like a, Brazen Borrower on their end step or something.
This deck is another example of, the creatures that come down have value as they come down. Icefang Codal, Spellstutter Sprite, Fairy Seer.
An Ingenious Infiltrator a lot of the time just hits them immediately and draws a card.
Right. And then you can turn them into 3/3s and continue generating value later with your Oko. This one also has the Oko Bitter Blossom combo that people were talking about originally when they saw Oko and were dreaming of 3/3s attacking every turn.
Yeah, and Oko can gain life to offset the downside of a Bitter Blossom. I mean, sometimes you like play Bitter Blossom and your opponent like Bolt Snap bolts you and suddenly like you're almost dead. But Oko generating food tokens and also Gilded Goose in this deck generating food tokens means that like you're almost never going to die to your Bitter Blossom.
Yeah. Really weird, cool deck.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, Oko is kind of making people try interesting stuff to figure out what is the best way to use Oko in Modern, because the power level is obviously there, but it doesn't slot into an existing deck. I mean, that's what we're seeing with a lot of the Eldraine cards is like, how do you use Emery? Oh, there's a broken artifact deck.
Right.
Let's throw her in there. How do you use Once Upon a Time? Oh, there's like a few broken decks that are looking for a particular creature. Let's throw it in there, right? And Oko is one of those cards that just didn't quite have a home. And so people are trying to discover Oko's true home. Yeah. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of really interesting stuff with Oko. And the reason we're talking about Oko every single episode. So one thing, there's a lot of talk about Mystic Sanctuary online because it's a fetchable land that is like has the potential to not only just slot into decks like Blue-White Control, but also kind of change what you can do in Modern a little bit. Like I've seen some Taking Turns variants that are using Mystic Sanctuary to, rebuy Time Warps so that you can take more turns. And I've seen Mystic Sanctuary, like the Paradoxical Outcome Urza decks are playing like some Mystic Sanctuaries so that you can fetch for it and get your Paradoxical Outcome back on your opponent's end steps. So if they counter it or, Thoughtseize it or whatever, it gives you a little bit of consistency. And I've seen like decks that are looking to loop Cryptic Command with Mystic Sanctuary, where you like tap down your opponent's creatures every turn, bounce your Mystic Sanctuary, or counter a spell, bounce your Mystic Sanctuary, and then just draw the same Cryptic Command every turn until you win.
Right.
And so against decks that's going to beat. Obviously, that doesn't beat every deck, but there's a lot of decks where that is good enough.
It's a soft lock at the very least.
Yeah, exactly. And so Mystic Sanctuary, more than just being like a good value island that you can always fetch for if your mana base has enough islands, it's kind of changing what you can do in Modern. And one thing you can do in Modern with it is put miracles on top of your deck. Mm-hmm. So we have a blue-white list that 5-0'd this week. It looks like pretty standard blue-white. Handful of 3-mana Teferis, handful of 5-mana Teferis, some Jason Mind Sculptors, Snapcaster Cryptic, Force Negation, Hieroglyphic Illumination, which is, always floating around in the cantrip suite. 1 Logic Knot, 1 Mana Leak, 4 Opt, 4 Path, 2 Spell Snare. And then 1 Entreat the Angels and 4 Terminus. And 4 Mystic Sanctuary. So this is kind of a return to what we were seeing when Jace first got unbanned, where everybody was like, oh, Jace is unbanned, we can set up our miracles. And it turned out that wasn't really the best thing you could do with Jace. I mean, it turned out to be good at the time because like Dredge was one of the better decks and Humans was one of the better decks, and Terminus was like good at disrupting those decks. But it kind of fell off in favor just because it was like inconsistent. Yeah. Jace is the only card that puts it back on top, and it's like a 4-drop. It just wasn't always doing enough.
Yeah, of course.
But with Mystic Sanctuary...
Boy, you only need 2 mana on your opponent's turn, a fetch land and a white source, to be able to use the Mystic Sanctuary on their turn.
Yeah.
Because you fetch, get the Mystic Sanctuary, put your Terminus on top,
and then opt with the Mystic Sanctuary.
Or Hieroglyphic Illumination or whatever with the Mystic Sanctuary, and immediately you're able to Terminus during your opponent's combat step, which is crazy.
With, I guess Teferi untapping 2 lands doesn't quite do it because you need the Mystic Sanctuary to fetch for it. But yeah, I mean, you have a fetch land and 1 untapped white source, right? And you can do your thing.
I mean, you can certainly go 5 mana to fairy, play a fetch land, plus untap, and then just have more mana than you could ever need.
You can use the other mana to spell snare their mana leak on Terminus or something.
Right.
Not that your Terminus is good in mana leak.
The one in
but
Treat the Angels is pretty different as well, because I'm not sure I've seen an Entreat the Angels in a little while.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because like the Miracle Suite here is similar to what we were seeing in like Legacy Miracles at its height, where Terminus is the best card in your deck. It's the reason obviously Legacy, like there's a lot of good cards, but Terminus is kind of like one of the big reasons to play the deck because it's like a 1 mana removal spell and it kills everything that your opponent is doing, right? Your opponent is Dredge, they have a bajillion zombies and an Icarid attacking you on turn 2. Who cares? It's on the bottom. They're all on the bottom. Your opponent has 1 True Nemesis attacking you to death with a Batter Skull on it or something. It doesn't matter. It's on the bottom.
Yep.
And it does the same thing here. Terminus is the most important miracle, but you also got to win the game.
Yeah.
And Treat the Angels wins the game.
Exactly. Yeah, really cool deck. I like that one. Yeah, Mystic Sanctuary, I know people think it's specifically a problem for Pauper. I do think that Mystic Sanctuary plus Ghostly Flicker is a bigger problem in Pauper than Mystic Sanctuary plus anything will be in Modern.
I think that's probably true.
But it is still something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, Pauper is in kind of a rough spot lately since everybody was kind of hoping that something would get banned.
Yeah.
This most recent period. On Monday this week, it was announced nothing was banned in any format. A lot of Pauper fans were holding out for Astrolabe. There was one other card that people wanted to get banned. Do you remember?
Other than
Maybe
Astrolabe?
I'm imagining it.
I don't think so. I think just Astrolabe was the...
Yeah, Astrolabe is the big one in Pauper. But they did announce today that they're moving the ban list from mid-November to October 21st.
Something like that, yeah. They're moving it up before Richmond.
Yeah.
Yeah. So most folks think that that's probably for Standard and specifically for Field of the Dead.
Yeah.
It would not hurt my feelings if it were for Pauper and Astrolabe. I doubt that there's much of anything that's going to change in Modern or Legacy.
Yeah. I mean, looking at deck lists, kind of doing research, how is Eldraine doing? You know, were our predictions accurate? Was there anything that surprised us? It looks like there's a lot of awesome stuff happening in Modern, and I don't think we have a ban on the horizon.
Modern looks dope.
Yeah, for sure. But that said, Standard is a little bit miserable with the Field of the Dead decks, particularly not just being like a very powerful deck, but being a very powerful deck that's super unfun to play with or against.
Well, and the big problem, in my opinion, is that Alpine Moon rotated, Blood Sun rotated, Field of Ruin rotated.
Yeah, all at the same time.
All at the same time, and nothing replaced them. So the
best we have is like Unmoored Ego on Field of the Dead.
There's Unmoored Ego, Assassin's Trophy, like Flame Sweep if you want to deal with it that way.
Well, dealing with the zombies is pretty easy. The problem is that they just make 4 or 5 zombies every single turn.
And so Golos being a thing that can, like it got to the point where Scapeshift was the worst card in the Scapeshift deck.
People were cutting it even before it rotated sometimes.
Exactly. So it is a bit of an oversight, a little bit of a problem, and so I would not be shocked to see it
it's just
head the way of the Ferocidon.
So like dangerous artifacts are always extra dangerous because any deck can just jam them, like we were talking about with Karn the Great Creator. He's not an artifact, but colorless cards. Dangerous lands, even worse.
Yep.
Because it's super hard to interact with them. You can't counter them.
Yep.
They generally don't print efficient ways to destroy them. So back to cool Eldraine stuff.
Man, this deck.
Yeah, this is a cool one. So Fires of Invention is starting to get played in Modern. I was watching LSV stream the other day. He was streaming a Taking Turns deck with Fire of Invention.
Yeah, with Savor the Moment.
Yeah, you get to play Savor the Moment. And he was playing the full 4 Mystic Sanctuary to like rebuy the spells. And then a bunch of Planeswalkers is like the win condition, right? Because if you're Fires allows you to like play Fires and Jace in the same turn, or Fires and Chandra Torch of Defiance in the same turn, or Fires and Savor, and the next turn Jace Time War. There's a lot of stuff you can
Sanctuary,
do.
Jace Time War.
Once you're playing stuff for free, right? You can play 9 plus mana worth of cards in a turn. But this list 5-0 on Magic Online, and it is it's like a Fires of Invention deck that is using the like As Foretold Electrodominance shell with 4 Ancestral Vision, 4 Crashing Footfalls, and then 3 Restore Balance, which is something that we kind of hadn't seen in these decks for a little while. But I guess with Fires of Invention, this player decided to try it again.
I like this one. This one also has 3 Fae of Wishes. To be able
Fae
to
of Wishes.
Get the other restore balance in addition to a bunch of sideboard bullets. So being able to play your Fires of Invention and immediately play a 0 cost of any kind, including restore balance, and not really hurting you too much because you have, Crashing Footfalls and Ancestral Visions where you don't need those lands in play.
Right.
So that's pretty spectacular. This is a weird one.
Yeah, so because they're playing Restore Balance, they're playing the 4 Greater Argonauts, so you can sacrifice all your lands and Armageddon your opponent, which is like the main thing you do with Restore Balance. But it also like can destroy all your opponent's creatures if you have no creatures.
Right.
If you have like played Simian Spirit Guide into Fires, and then you play Restore Balance and you only have 1 card left because you just like dumped your hand, because they're playing 4 Simian Spirit Guide as well.
Right.
Your opponent will discard their hand. Like there's more fair things you can do with Restore Balance, but the big one is destroy all your opponent's land. So 4 Greater Gargadon. They've also got 4 Chalice of the Void because you don't need any 1-drops.
Right.
And so you can just counter all your opponent's
You're already
one-drops.
playing Simian Spirit Guide, so why not?
Yeah, just power it out on turn 2.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's good enough.
Also 4 Teleria West in this deck, which I really like a lot because it's not a spell, but it gets you a 0 cost.
Yeah, and so the Fae of Wishes technology is something that we've seen in Standard a bunch in the Fires of Invention decks, because you can, like, if you untap with the Fires, you can Fae for anything, play it for free. And then in Standard, you also are often playing, like, 1 Castle Vantress or something else, because you want to find a way to like use your mana, because with Fires of Invention you can only play 2 spells a turn, and generally you're playing them for free, so you have all these untapped lands. If you can find a way to use them, you're going to be able to like do things even more efficiently, right? Because you're playing 2 spells for free, you have all this mana that you can use on activated abilities like Teleria West, so you can Teleria West for any of your 0 costs, or you can Teleria West for 1 Blast Zone, which is another thing you can spend your mana on. I think Teleria West is like a cool way in Modern to use your extra mana with Fires. If you're playing cards you can search with.
Love it.
You can search for Chalice of the Void with Teleria West too. It's nice. And then like the sideboard Fae of Wishes package. It's not as spicy as what I often see in Standard, where people are playing like off-color weird stuff in like best of 1. You don't need a real sideboard.
Right. There's no casualties of war. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I played the Jeskai Fires deck in the like win every card in Standard challenge.
Yeah.
Because I thought it had like a reasonable Golos matchup, and it was also like an unfair deck that is just good in best of 1.
Yeah.
And so my sideboard was just all like weird black and green cards that like I should not be able to cast, but with Fires I can.
Like
but this
lands.
is just like a fairly normal sideboard where
like you have nothing but red and blue lands in play, and then you play like Garrick.
Yeah.
Or something ridiculous. Yeah.
Nicol Bolas was the big one.
Sure.
It was a great 5-drop that you could Fae of Wishes for the turn after you play Fires.
Yep.
But yeah, this is like all cards that you might actually sideboard in, but they give you flexibility if you can Fae of Wishes for them. Yeah.
Cool.
Leyline is the only one you can't cast, but you could actually
Leyline of Sanctity.
Leyline of Sanctity. Yes. You could Fae of Wishes for it and cast it with Fires in play. Sometimes that's going to be good enough.
Cool.
But yeah, we had another deck. This one stood out to Reuben when we were scrolling through.
Because I'm a burn gentleman.
Yeah, why don't you tell us about this deck?
So I like red cards. If for those of you that know me, that will not come as a
Mox
surprise.
Ruby.
I am the Mox Ruby. And mono red prowess has sort of replaced like red white burn in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Just because of how it matched up against the popular decks of recent memory, specifically against Hogak, before Hogak went the way of the dodo. But this prowess deck features 4 Bone Crusher Giant, because something about these decks is that sometimes if you're playing against specifically like the black-green full of removal kind of decks, sometimes you run out of gas. And this is a good way. The adventure mechanic in general is a great way to sort of just draw another card with all of your cards, really. It's a very specific card, but in the case of Bone Crusher Giant, it's a card you want anyway.
Yeah.
So you're able to have a card that deals damage, and not just damage, but unpreventable, like good damage.
Yeah.
And then get a 4/3 that, oh, by the way, if your opponent tries to kill it, will kill them right back.
Yeah.
So that's a great little addition to this package with the full set of Soulscar Mages and Monastery Swift Spears alongside the Bone Crusher Giants and, oh, by the way, of course, Goblin Guide, with your general suite of burn spells.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me with Bone Crusher Giant in this list is like generally with prowess decks, you see like very low CMC because you want to cast as many spells in a turn as you possibly can so that you can trigger prowess a bunch of times. And so every card in this deck either costs 1 mana or can cost 1 mana because we're playing 4 Light Up the Stage, 4 Rift Bolt, 4 Skewer the Critics, which all cost 3, right? But you can cast them all for 1. And then all the creatures, Goblin Guide, Monastery Swift Spear, Skullscar Mage, are all 1-drops. You have 4 Lightning Bolt, 1-drop, 4 Seal of Fire, 1-drop, 4 Lava Spike, 1-drop. So everything costs 1. So like any extra mana you have, you're spending on Bone Crusher. And it's interesting that like of all the cards you could choose to be like kind of your mana sink late game card, it's an Eldraine card.
It is really interesting, but and it doesn't even have haste.
Yeah.
It doesn't deal a ton. It deals 2 damage for 2 mana.
Yeah.
But it's in I guess it's in exactly the right kind of spot.
The card advantage is powerful enough.
Yeah.
I'm glad to see Bone Crusher Giant making a splash in Modern because I do think that like it is deceptively powerful.
Oh, for sure.
Despite being like a 3-mana creature that doesn't do anything the turn you play it. It like does something the turn before you play it.
Sure, exactly.
Has super haste in that way, right?
Right.
And then, this is 20 lands. I don't know a lot about Mono Red Prowess. Is that like a usual land count for Mono Red Prowess?
I'm pretty sure. Sometimes it's less, but in this case, we're playing 20 lands with 4 of the Horizon 8 of the Horizon Canopy lands.
Yeah,
from Modern Horizons,
Fiery Islet and 4 Sunbaked Canyon.
Right, and so this is every card in the deck costs 1, so you don't need a bunch of lands.
Yeah.
Except for Bone Crusher Giant.
So that's what's cool about these lands is like if you have 2 Bone Crushers in your hand, you are playing, more lands so you can make sure you can like cast them in a reasonable amount of time. But if you flood out, which is super easy to do in these decks, you're playing 8 lands that you can sacrifice to draw a card. So
it's perfect.
Yeah. So I think like it's interesting that those lands maybe make Bone Crusher more playable in this type of deck than it normally would be.
I agree with that.
Which is cool to see like the last year of incredibly powerful sets for Modern kind of working together to make 3-mana 4/3s possible.
Yeah.
Oh, we got some goblins. You were excited about this one too. You want to talk about this? What's new in the goblins world?
So not a ton is brand new in the goblins world, but
Modern Horizons was a big set for goblins, right?
I mean, you have what's his name, munitions expert, and obviously Pashalik Mons also, and Goblin Matron coming into Modern. I mean, those are huge pieces for the goblin.
M20. I kind of forgot that Ringleader was M20. I thought it was in.
So there was one addition to the goblins deck. That introduces a brand new color to the Goblins deck, really, into the main deck, I should say, which is Grumgully the Generous as another Goblin Lord making its way into the Goblins deck. Now, Grumgully, for those of you that don't know, is a 3/3 for 3. Each other non-human creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. So that does a couple of interesting things. A lot of the time, your lords are the first things that get targeted, and when they leave, all of those benefits go away. Grumgully lets you have those benefits stick around after Grumgully dies.
That's true.
So that's a hugely important piece of the Grumgully puzzle. The other thing that Grumgully does is combo with Murderous Redcap and a sack outlet to be able to just go infinite. There is 1 Murderous Redcap and then 4 Skirk Prospector in this particular Goblins list.
and the 4 Slinging Lieutenant.
Yep. Well, 1 Slinging Lieutenant.
Or 1 Slinging Lieutenant. And the 4 Goblin Ringleader and 4 Goblin Matron in this deck help you find your combo pieces, even though you're only playing 1 of each and it feels like clunky to like maybe assemble this 3-card combo made mostly of 1-ofs. You have like a ton of, ways to dig through your deck or search your deck to find these cards.
I mean, there was a long time, and I mean like 3 years in Legacy where the best card advantage card in the entire format was Goblin Ringleader. Yeah. Goblins was the deck that drew the most cards.
Yeah.
Like, so
in
this
a format
is not
full of like brainstorms and blue decks.
right, but Brainstorm draws a card.
Yeah.
Right? Jace
Ponder draws a card. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So those decks weren't carded. They weren't playing Fact or Fiction. They weren't playing Deep Analysis.
And they still aren't.
They still
a lot
aren't.
of the time in Legacy, you see a lot of cards
Right.
and then you run out because all your cards cost 1 and you played them all.
And then, as it turns out, Ringleader was not replaced in terms of card advantage by any blue card. It was later. This was when Regal Force drew a bunch of cards. Yeah. So it's always been that way. And now it's porting into Modern, which I think is a really good, healthy thing that Wizards has decided they want to try to do. I'm looking forward to Goblins being a staple of a format at some point somewhere. I would really like for that.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of them pop up. I actually saw another interesting Goblins list that was playing the 2-mana goblin from Modern Horizons with Persist. This is a 2-mana 2/2, one in a black. I don't remember the name of the card off the top of my head, which is unfortunate. I'm usually the card rememberer on the show. But Putrid Goblin? No, Putrid Goblin is the one that gives -1/-1 to something when it dies. I don't know. Something like that. And they were playing 4 of those, which also goes infinite with Grumgully and a Sack Outlet, but it doesn't kill them the way Redcap does. So if you have a Skirk Prospector, you will get infinite mana with Grumgully, which is maybe enough to win. But if it's not, it kills them with Sling Gang or Pashlik Mon. So Sling Gang, you can sack it infinite times, or with Pashlik Mons in play. And then it was like a similar shell of like 4 Matron. I don't remember if it was playing 4 Ringleader, but it was playing at least 3 because I don't think you can go below that.
Of course.
And then, various one of utility goblins and Mog War Marshals and munitions experts and all that. But I thought it was interesting that it was like a little bit more all in on the combo versus this deck, where this deck is playing 1 Persist creature, 1 Grumgully, and that deck was playing 4 Persist creatures. And I think it was playing more than 1 Grumgully. It's too bad that I didn't bring it up before the episode because I didn't anticipate wanting to talk about it. But since we're on the subject of goblins, I saw a cool one. So yeah, it'll be cool that Grumgully is now an option and that goblins players kind of can figure out what the best configuration of the deck is.
I really like Goblins quite a bit. I think that if I were to play in a Modern tournament, as much as I love Mono Red Prowess and I love Burn, I think Goblins might be the deck that I would play just because I don't get to play as often as I like, and it's so fun.
Yeah.
I like to draw cards and I like to play mountains, and so Ringleader.
Nobody does those things better than Goblins.
Nope. It just warms my heart, is what it does.
Ooh, this was a cool one.
So we're going out with a bang here, right? Is this the last deck?
This is the last deck that I pulled up. Yeah. So this is a.
This deck is weird.
We were talking about, like, after the Faithless Looting ban, we were talking about on the cast what we thought was actually going to be dead when Faithless Looting got banned. We didn't think Phoenix was. Turns out it mostly is. But I don't know. I think Phoenix is a very powerful card, and I think that there's potential for it.
There was a recent Phoenix deck that is like almost mono blue that has Phoenix and Creeping Chill that is now like a Drowned Secrets deck. It's just
it was a standard deck, wasn't it?
That might have been a standard deck. But people have been experimenting with just self-mill, like mono blue kind of self-mill stuff with Tome Scour and just the various other super powerful.
I guess Drowned Secrets is cheap enough to see play in Modern. Maybe
it's possible. But yeah, just like Arclight Phoenix alongside Narc Amoebas and Creeping Chills and things that just put things into your graveyard. So it's possible, but you're right. Phoenix definitely took a huge nosedive.
Yeah, I mean, we've got like the Royal Scions. Maybe you're like a more mid-rangey, like Drake's style deck, like what Phoenix was getting played in Standard.
Right.
And like you have Charticourse, Haggle, like it hasn't quite come together that we've seen yet. I still think it could have legs, but for now it's dead. It's not putting up results. Nobody's playing it. It's so that was one we missed. We knew Dredge would still be around, and it is now playing Haggle.
And Merchant of the Veil has been a very good direct replacement for Faithless Looting.
Yeah, and it's an instant. It draws a card, like, it draws a not very good card, and I kind of underestimated adventures a little bit because like you're drawing a not very good card, but sometimes you play it and your opponent just has to answer it.
Right.
Like if you play Merchant of the Veil in Dredge, yes, it's 3 mana, yes, it's a 2/3, and it's not really threatening your opponent's life total, but your opponent has to kill it.
Yeah, your opponent still has to pay it attention because it will kill them eventually. Just like a Snapcaster Mage leaves around a 2/1 body.
Right.
Eventually, that Snapcaster Mage is just going to kill you if you don't.
Yeah, and there's plenty of decks in Modern that have like relied on Snapcaster Mage to kill you. Blue-white control and Splinter Twin a lot of the time just kill you with a Snapcaster Mage. Like you want to hold up counter magic for my Splinter Twin every turn? Take two. And Merchant of the Veil does the same thing, but it also in Dredge in particular allows you to just like dredge more every turn. So like it allows you to like rip through your deck at an inefficient rate, but one that if your opponent doesn't stop you, you are going to win.
Right.
So it like these adventure cards are really cool. And Murderous Rider is the same thing. Like I kind of underestimated because I thought the 2 life would be relevant in a lot of situations. But the fact that like in matchups where the 2 life is going to be relevant, you could just play a 2/3
with lifelink. Yeah.
Like Burn has to like attack into that, or they have to spend a bolt on it or something, and it's going to set them back. Like
it's pretty great.
We went way off topic. Oh, so we were talking about decks that Faithless Looting that would be killed by Faithless Looting getting banned. One of them we thought would be dead, and I think we mentioned on the cast was Goryo's Vengeance, because without being like having that turn 1 way to dig for combo pieces and dump them in the graveyard with like that level of consistency, we thought that this like kind of clunky deck just wasn't going to make it. But it turns out there is a Goryo's Vengeance deck that 5-0'd, and the way that they are doing it now is with Ilharg the Razeboar. It's a Goryo's Vengeance target that you can bring in to put a creature from your hand into play, an Emrakul or a Grieselbrand. So, like, if you don't have one of those in your opener, you can discard Nilharg later. You can put it into play even without discard. So it kind of allows you to get around discard. But also, it only costs 5 mana. Yeah. Like, you can just cast Ilharg and attack with it.
Right, and this deck is doing that in with Pentad Prism and with Generator Servant.
Generator Servant is a sweet one.
Yeah.
I'm going to explain it because I have to imagine a lot of listeners haven't seen this card. It's I know about it because of Limited actually, but
it was a core set 2018 card,
something like that. But it's a 2 mana 2/1 in red. It has tap, sacrifice it, add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. If that mana is spent on a creature spell, it gains haste until end of turn. So it'll give your Ilharg, it'll ramp you to Ilharg and give your Ilharg haste on turn 3, because this is a 2-drop. So on turn 3, it adds the 2 mana you need to get to turn to 5 mana, and you will Harg them.
Pretty spectacular.
Put in a Grieselbrand or something and win.
Yeah.
It's interesting because this deck got rid of the Werberigmos package. I think having to include Generator Servant and Pentad Prism to try and turn 3 Ilharg, because it's also playing 3 Pentad Prism, meant that you had to kind of give up on the like 1-turn kill Borborygmos plan and just, you know, draw enough cards to win and not just kill them outright.
And the other thing that this deck is doing, and you can see it in the deck building, is it does also have a Wishclaw Talisman, which is a Throne of Eldraine card. And a couple of the main deck targets for it are Blood Moon, which hints to a longer game, and Kolaghan's Command, which hints to a longer game.
That's true.
So if you can't Through the Breach, if you can't Generator Servant, if you can't, you know, get out there
Goryo's
turn 3,
Vengeance,
then you have these longer game options.
Playing 2 Thoughtseize, 2 Collective Brutality being another way to get a creature in your graveyard. 4 Insolent Neonate is the looting replacement.
Yep.
I don't know if I actually like that better than Haggle in this deck.
So, yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I think that the reason why is because Kolaghan's Command can get it back.
Ooh, that's probably true.
That's probably the only reason why. The one of Kolaghan's Command can get back an Insolent Neonate if you really care.
I think that you're also very mana hungry. Like Insolent Neonate allows you to like play it on turn 1, and like if you don't have something to discard, you can just attack with it, and later you can discard and immediately Goryo's in the same turn. Which is maybe a benefit of it. Like it can sit out there. Like you can invest the mana on a previous turn, whereas Haggle, you have to immediately have something to discard or else.
That's true.
Because like with Neonate in particular, you can reanimate Emrakul on turn 2 because you can Neonate and then turn 2, sack Neonate to discard Emrakul, trigger on the stack.
That's
Goryo's.
much more relevant.
I had to talk through it.
Yeah.
But with Haggle, you can't do that because if you Haggle Emrakul on turn 1, it'll shuffle and it'll be gone. And on turn 2, you can't spend the 1 mana to Haggle.
Right.
So I guess Insolent Neonate is the only way to put out Emrakul on turn 2 here.
Future, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
But yeah, that's all the decks that we kind of highlighted from this week.
mean, that's a lot of
It seems like
decks.
Eldraine is doing good stuff for Modern. And I think there's probably stuff here that we didn't even touch on in this list of decks.
Oh,
that
for
we've
sure.
got, but-
There's the weird Jeskai Ascendancy outcome deck that popped up.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit last year. That's why I didn't highlight it this week. But if you have anything...
There's so many decks that don't even have new Eldraine cards in it that are just weird and possible to play in this format. Modern is in a great spot right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I think that pretty much wraps up the episode. We got through all the decks we wanted to talk about. We got to talk about Modern a little bit, or Eldraine in Modern in general terms.
Is there anything in Eldraine that you think still can happen in Modern?
So I think the Royal Scions is being underutilized personally because it is another 3-mana Planeswalker that pluses up to 6.
Sure.
It's not as powerful as Oko, I'll say, which I think is the reason that we're seeing people kind of break outside the box and think of unusual ways to use Oko, whereas Royal Scions is still in the phase where it's like, can I make this work in an existing deck, which is what we're seeing with Grixis Death Shadow or kind of like blue-red Dreadhorde Arcanist decks, which have never been like incredibly mainstream in Modern, but it's something that people have been trying for a while. I do think that Royal Scions has more potential than that, and I think that if somebody decides to go out on a limb with Royal Scions, I think that it has potential.
Nice. Yeah. I think the only other thing that I would be interested to see is if Infect can take any of the tools. Specifically, I wanted to see Infect try to go with Embercleave to just get just get in there because that deck can have a bunch of 1/1s.
So like a red...
Like a red infect. Because there's a bunch of pump spells. You have the card selection. You can protect your things. It's possible. I mean, I'm not the deck building expert for it. But.
Sure. Well, that's interesting. Like, you want to be attacking with more creatures to make Embercleave cheaper.
Yeah.
So what kind of creatures? I guess like you can attack with a Noble Hierarch if you have to. Right. Although I guess tapping it for a mana does the same thing. Right. But what kind of stuff do you think we're using to discount Embercleave?
So, I mean, the deck does already have a number of... I mean, it's already got Glistener Elf. It's already got your unblockable...
well, that's a blue, so we're Teamer?
We're Teamer.
Okay, we're Teamer.
Have to be. A Teamer with 4 Inkwell...
Inkmoth? I mean,
Inkmoth Nexus
we just looked at a 3-color deck with 4 Utopia Sprawl and 4 Field of Ruin. Right. So this is not weird for Modern.
So I think that deck needs to have more stuff like Noble Hierarch, maybe Gilded Goose, maybe Birds of Paradise included in the deck that you can be like, all right, I'm going to swing in with my 0-power creatures. Oh, by the way, here's a 2-mana Embercleave to put on my Glistener Elf or my Blighted Aid.
That's interesting.
So, it's possible. It's a deck that I always have my eye on.
Infect?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
well, if you... Infect has shown that if you take your eye off of it for a minute, it can just kill you. I mean, like during the dark times of Hogak, Infect was putting up results because it could just like Inkmoth Nexus 10 poison the Hogak decks and they weren't playing interaction.
And the other one that I'm interested to see is that Emery really hasn't done anything in Modern. It's a lot tougher to take advantage of.
I mean, Emery's showing up in a lot of the Wurza decks, usually the Paradoxical Outcome ones. Yeah.
Fair enough.
More so than like the Wurza decks that are playing War of Invention. We've been seeing Emery in some of the Paradoxical Outcome decks. They don't play red for Goblin Engineer a lot of the time because they're not playing the Thopter Sword combo. They just want artifacts in play and they don't want to use the graveyard.
Gotcha.
That's like the advantage of the Paradoxical Outcome Urza decks versus the War decks. The War decks are usually playing Thopter Swords, so they need their graveyard.
Sure.
So they want to play Engineer. And the Paradoxical Outcome decks are not looking to rely as heavily on their graveyard, so they're like playing Emery more as like a value engine.
Cool. I mean, Throne clearly has had a lot of impact already on Modern and the older formats. I think it's just a really cool set. I love Eldraine personally. I think it's just
a lot of cool stuff.
It's just a fun and funny and entertaining set.
Is funny.
In addition to being super powerful in lots of interesting and different ways.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, I heard, I was drafting last night and I heard somebody like, oh, I bake your gingerbread man into a pie because they had like made it a 4/4 or something. Yeah. And it's just so funny to like overhear people playing cards in the set because like they're like funny fairy tales, interacting with each other in a way that is fun. So, but yeah, so thanks for watching / listening. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Also, like, comment, subscribe if you're listening to the podcast. It always helps us to have more engagement on our podcast and on our videos. And thanks for watching / listening. See you guys next time.
Thank you for your attention. See you later, alligator.
This has been a production of Time Traveler Media, sending podcasts into the future.